A flight attendant mocked the black CEO's baby by using him as a tray table for another passenger's meal. But just 7 minutes later, the attendant was used as one for the CEO's knife. What happens next will leave you speechless. He turned a baby into a tray while the cabin laughed, except the child's father. If you believe dignity is not a joke, subscribe now. Nathan Corbin stepped off the escalator into the bright, humming expanse of Dalebridge International Airport, the infant weight of his 8-month-old son cradled securely against his chest. The airport thrummed with movement, heels clicking, announcements echoing, suitcases trailing behind sharp-dressed travelers chasing tight connections. But Nathan was focused. He adjusted the baby sling with one hand and scanned the departure boards with the other, his sharp eyes locking onto Gate 43B, Crestwell City, on time. He moved through the concourse with purpose, cutting through the thick current of passengers. In his arms, Theo stirred but didn't fuss. Nathan whispered, "Almost there, buddy," his voice calm but tight, the way a man speaks when trying to convince himself as much as the child he's comforting. His mind wasn't on the airport chaos or the chatter of hurried tourists. It was on the sleek pitch deck saved on his tablet, the one that could unlock $20 million in growth capital for Corbin Dynamics. A presentation built from months of sleepless nights, one he was scheduled to deliver in less than 6 hours. As Nathan reached the boarding area, he scanned the crowd. Businessmen typing furiously. A teenager sprawled on the floor, earbuds in. Flight crew chatting just beyond the counter. The usual. But something, an almost imperceptible shift in atmosphere, snagged at his senses. The kind of instinct honed from years in boardrooms where every raised eyebrow or withheld handshake meant more than words. Then he saw him. A tall man in navy slacks and a pressed white shirt, sleeves rolled just high enough to suggest effort while still looking sharp. Flight attendant Mark Hollis. His name badge caught the light, but it was the expression on his face that caught Nathan's attention. Hollis's eyes lingered too long on Theo, an amused, almost smirking gaze that didn't match the practiced smile he wore for other passengers. Nathan's brows pulled together slightly. Not enough to cause a scene, just enough to register the odd tension. "Gate 43B now boarding Group A," the intercom blared. Nathan adjusted Theo and stepped forward. As he approached the gate, Hollis turned slightly toward a coworker, saying something under his breath. The other man, a younger attendant with dark-rimmed glasses, snorted quietly. Nathan couldn't hear the words, but he caught the glance flicked in his direction, the smugness barely concealed. He said nothing. His boarding pass scanned with a beep. The jet bridge swallowed him and the baby into its narrow metallic corridor. The air cooled quickly, the distant rumble of the aircraft engines a soft growl beneath the humming fluorescent lights overhead. Nathan walked steadily, nodding once at the pilot who stood outside the cockpit in brief conversation with a technician. Theo clung to his shirt with one fist, eyes wide and observant, his small face turned toward the unknown. Inside the cabin, the artificial cheer of airline hospitality resumed. Passengers found their seats, overhead bins slammed shut, and the occasional grunt of irritation punctuated the slow procession. Nathan reached his row, 4A and 4B, and settled into the aisle seat. He gently shifted Theo from his shoulder to his lap, rocking him slightly. The child blinked up at him with sleep-heavy eyes, and Nathan whispered soothing nonsense into his ear. He didn't notice Hollis again until the attendant reappeared in the aisle, performing his safety check with the bored rhythm of repetition. Hollis's footsteps stopped near row 4, his attention lingering again, this time more openly. Nathan kept his head down, double-checking that Theo's small noise-canceling earphones were secure, but he could feel the stare like static behind his neck. "Need anything, sir?" Hollis asked abruptly, breaking the silence. Nathan looked up, startled. "No, we're fine, thank you." "Ah, good. Looks like someone brought their own tray table." Hollis's voice was louder this time, theatrical as if he were performing for an audience. Nathan blinked. "Excuse me?" But Hollis was already walking away, chuckling to himself. A few passengers looked up, confused. One gave a short laugh, uncertain and awkward. Nathan forced a breath out through his nose. Was that a joke? A poor one, sure, but he didn't get the chance to dwell on it. Moments later, Hollis returned, stepping directly into the aisle beside them. His smile was wider now, full of mischief. Without asking, without a hint of hesitation, he reached down and lifted Theo slightly from Nathan's lap with both forearms, positioning the child flat across them as if displaying an object. Nathan stiffened, his hands moving up instinctively, But Hollis held the baby for a few beats longer. "Behold," Hollis said, loud enough for several nearby rows to hear, "our new in-flight surface." He reached behind himself and grabbed a passenger's snack plate, crackers, a small cup of fruit, and placed it squarely on Theo's back. A few people chuckled. Others stared in stunned silence. Someone near the window muttered, "What the—" Nathan was frozen, not just in shock but in calculation. His heart pounded, rage rushing to his face, but a screaming response wouldn't make Theo safer in that moment. He reached forward, every muscle tight with control, and took his son back, gently but firmly. Hollis let go with a shrug, still smiling. "Relax," he said, brushing imaginary dust from his uniform. "Just trying to lighten the mood." He turned and walked off as though nothing had happened. Nathan sat motionless, clutching Theo to his chest. The baby whimpered, curling tighter into his father's shirt. The tray still sat balanced on the armrest. Nathan picked it up, hands trembling faintly, and set it on the empty seat beside him. He scanned the cabin. A few passengers were whispering. One or two looked away when their eyes met his. The humiliation was sharp, but deeper than embarrassment. It was fear, anger, the deep, gnawing sense that something so vile had just been played off as a joke and that no one, not even the flight crew, was going to stop it. He reached down and retrieved his phone from his bag. Not to call anyone. To prepare. Because the moment Hollis turned back again, Nathan Corbin would be ready. Sometimes the most dangerous storms arrive wearing a smile. "Looks like we've got ourselves a portable tray table here," Hollis said, his voice unnervingly loud in the quiet cabin. Nathan Corbin blinked, disoriented not by the statement but by the action that followed. In one smooth, practiced movement, Hollis reached down and scooped up baby Theo from Nathan's lap as if he were lifting a bundle of laundry, not a living, breathing infant. The motion startled Theo, whose small arms flailed as he let out a surprised whimper. Nathan's hand shot out instinctively, halfway between protest and protection, but Hollis had already turned slightly, holding Theo flat across his forearms like a serving tray. The snack plate came next, cold crackers and a plastic-wrapped cheese triangle, and with an exaggerated flourish, Hollis set it on the baby's back, balancing it like a prop on stage. His lips curled in theatrical amusement, eyes scanning the nearby passengers as if expecting applause. A few startled chuckles rose, hesitant and awkward, from across the aisle. Others exchanged glances, unsure whether what they were witnessing was meant to be funny or if it was crossing into something far more disturbing. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. His muscles locked. Time seemed to stretch thin, and for a brief second, he wasn't a CEO preparing for a crucial investor meeting. He was just a father watching a stranger turn his child into a joke. "Put him down," Nathan said, his voice low and tight, almost lost in the white noise hum of the cabin. But Hollis didn't hear, or chose not to. He adjusted the plate, even tapped it playfully, as if inspecting the stability of his makeshift table. The sound was soft, but sharp, like a knock on Nathan's own spine. Theo squirmed, a soft cry beginning to form, the sound small but aching. The baby's body was too young, too delicate for this kind of mockery. Nathan rose a few inches from his seat, his hand extended, his other arm bracing against the seat back in front of him for balance. His mind raced, not just from fury but from calculation. A sudden confrontation might escalate quickly. He could already feel the attention from the cabin drifting toward them like a rising tide. Some passengers were whispering, some leaning back in their seats as if to physically distance themselves from the tension. Hollis finally turned, met Nathan's eyes, and smiled. Smug, hollow. "Relax, it's just a joke," he said casually, lifting the plate off Theo's back as if that somehow erased the offense. "No harm done." But harm had been done, just not the kind visible to the eye. Nathan reached out and took his son back into his arms slowly, gently, cradling him as if to erase the contact that had just happened. Theo's cheeks were flushed, his eyes wide with confusion. Nathan rocked him softly, his gaze never leaving Hollis's face. The flight attendant gave a mock shrug, then turned and strolled up the aisle as though nothing had happened. Inside Nathan, something cold and sharp settled beneath the surface. It wasn't just anger, it was insult, calculation, and something deeper. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. He didn't move for a moment, trying to still his pulse and push down the instinct to lash out. His fingers traced gentle circles on Theo's back, but his mind was racing through every implication, every risk, every possible step. A man from the row behind leaned forward slightly, voice low. "You should report that," he murmured, eyes flicking toward Hollis's retreating figure. But the way he said it, like it wouldn't matter, carried more pity than encouragement. Nathan didn't answer. Not yet. He needed to understand who he was dealing with. The air inside the plane felt denser now, and Nathan could sense the invisible line that had divided the cabin, the passengers who would pretend they saw nothing, and the few who would remember every detail. He looked down at Theo, who had quieted again, though his tiny hands still gripped his father's shirt tightly, fingers balled into soft fists. Nathan slowly slid his phone from the seat pocket in front of him and opened the camera. He adjusted it, subtly pointing the lens toward the aisle, and tapped record. His hands were steady now, not from calm, but from control. He wouldn't forget this moment, and he wouldn't let the world forget either. The flight attendants continued their duties. The cabin lights dimmed. The plane taxied toward the runway, the hum of engines building in the background. Passengers went back to their magazines and phones, pretending normalcy. But Nathan sat perfectly still, his mind writing every detail into memory. Who laughed, who turned away, who watched and stayed silent. He had no doubt that Hollis would return. Bullies always did. Nathan whispered to Theo, barely audible. "You're okay. I've got you." But his thoughts were already elsewhere, thinking 5 moves ahead. The rules had just changed. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't harmless. This was war. Sometimes the worst wounds aren't made of flesh, but of dignity. Nathan pulled Theo back into his arms with a steady, deliberate motion, every inch of him burning with controlled fury. The soft whimper of his son sent a jolt through his chest. Hollis walked away without a backward glance, a smirk still playing at the edges of his mouth, as if he had just completed some clever performance. The air inside the cabin felt heavier now, filled not just with recycled oxygen, but with silent judgment, tension, and the thick discomfort of witnesses unsure if they had just seen a joke or something far more disturbing. Theo's small body trembled against Nathan's chest, and the warmth of his son's cheek pressed into his shirt only deepened the ache in his gut. Nathan's mind replayed the image again and again. Hollis's hands lifting Theo without permission, the plate set casually on his back, the laughter that followed. He hadn't even reacted at first, not because he didn't care, but because the shock had momentarily frozen him. That was his child, not a toy, not a joke, not a piece of furniture for the amusement of strangers. A low murmur rose from the row behind him. "You should report that," a male passenger said quietly, leaning forward. His voice carried a hesitant, almost reluctant tone, the kind that offered support without truly standing behind it. Nathan didn't respond. The man's words, while well-intentioned, felt hollow. Report it to whom? The same airline that employed the man who'd just turned his infant into a gag? The same system that would likely brush it aside as a misunderstanding? Nathan's first instinct was to rise, to confront Hollis directly in the aisle, to make him understand the weight of what he'd just done. But another voice, quieter but sharper, cut through his anger. Think. Outrage might feel satisfying in the moment, but it wouldn't hold up when it mattered. Not when he was a public figure on the verge of a career-defining meeting. Not when the only proof was the unease in the room and his word against Hollis's. He reached into his jacket, his movements calm and precise, and pulled out his phone. Shielding the screen with his hand, he unlocked the camera and tapped the red record button. The lens glinted faintly under the overhead lights as it began quietly capturing the rows ahead, the aisle to the right, and the space where Hollis would inevitably return. And return he did. Minutes later, as if summoned by the silence itself, Hollis made his way back down the aisle. His eyes scanned the passengers with casual detachment, but when he reached Nathan's row, they locked onto him. There was no warmth in that gaze, no apology, only the same smugness that had tainted every word earlier. "You think this is funny?" Nathan asked, his voice low, steady, and unmistakably serious. He didn't raise his tone, but every syllable landed like a weight. His body remained still, one arm wrapped protectively around Theo, the other gripping the phone just tight enough to avoid trembling. Hollis paused. He tilted his head slightly as if trying to read the room again. Then, with a shrug, he replied, "Lighten up, it was just a joke." There it was. Not remorse, not confusion, but mockery. The kind that carried no shame, only contempt for those who refused to play along. Nathan studied him, his jaw set like stone. Behind Hollis, another male crew member briefly peeked out from the galley, as if curious but not willing to intervene. The other passengers nearby looked away, some adjusting their seatbelts, others flipping through in-flight magazines with forced focus. Only one man, seated across the aisle, met Nathan's eyes for a second, giving the faintest nod as if to say, "I saw it too." Nathan turned his attention back to Hollis, who was already moving down the aisle again, unbothered. The words echoed in Nathan's head. Just a joke, as if the weight of someone else's dignity could be tossed aside with a laugh. Theo shifted slightly, his small fingers clutching at Nathan's collar. The soft grip brought Nathan back from the spiral of rage tightening in his chest. He kissed the top of his son's head and whispered something only Theo could hear. Then he adjusted the camera angle slightly, making sure it covered the path to the galley and the crew station. This wasn't just about outrage anymore, it was about proof. He leaned back slowly into his seat, the metal armrest cool against his elbow, and let his mind begin to work, not in rage, but in strategy. He wasn't just going to file a complaint, he was going to build a case. Every word, every glance, every cruel smirk, he would document it all, because this wasn't the first time someone like Hollis had hidden behind a uniform and a smirk, and it wouldn't be the last, unless someone made it the last. Nathan didn't know yet what the next hours would bring, or how far this single ugly moment would stretch into the future. But he knew this: if no one stood up now, this would happen again. To another child, another father, another silent passenger unsure if what they saw was real, or if it was just a joke. He looked out the window briefly. The sky was smooth, pale blue stretching endlessly beyond the clouds, but inside the cabin, turbulence was just beginning. Injustice, witnessed and left unchallenged, becomes permission. Nathan Corbin's hand tightened slightly around his son's back as the quiet returned to the cabin, thick as fog. Theo had finally stopped crying, his tiny breaths brushing against Nathan's collarbone in a shaky rhythm. But the stillness wasn't peaceful, it was loaded. The moment the laughter had faded, the air inside the aircraft had changed. Conversations resumed, but they felt hollow, artificial. A few passengers cast nervous glances in his direction, others avoided eye contact altogether. The stain of what had just happened still lingered. Across the aisle, a man in a gray blazer held his phone low, the screen dimmed, and tapped something discreetly. Nathan caught it. His posture didn't change, but his eyes flicked over to the man's hands. Photos. Of that moment. Nathan shifted Theo slightly, brushing the back of his son's head with the side of his cheek. Then, in a soft, measured voice, he leaned a few inches toward the man and said, "I may need your help later." The man glanced up and met Nathan's gaze. His eyes were sharp, steady, not curious but calculating. He gave a single nod and quietly replied, "Name's Ryan Maddox." "I saw everything." His tone was level, devoid of drama, but filled with intent. Nathan gave a slight nod of thanks and leaned back. He didn't know if Ryan was an ally yet, but he knew the look of a man who understood stakes. That mattered more than sympathy. From the corner of his eye, Nathan caught another shift in the cabin. Mark Hollis was near the galley now, speaking in hushed tones to a younger attendant. The boyish face, the sideswept blonde hair, it was Kyle Mercer, the one who had chuckled earlier when the plate was lifted from Theo's back. Kyle didn't even try to hide his smirk now. His lips curled with casual cruelty as he flicked a glance toward Nathan. Hollis nudged him with an elbow, and they both shared a look, not long, but unmistakable. Not remorse, not awkwardness, amusement. Nathan felt a deep coil tighten in his stomach. These weren't embarrassed men caught in a mistake. They were performers laughing after a successful show, but Nathan wasn't finished. He was just getting started. The drink service began, and the rattle of the cart broke the stagnant tension. Hollis resumed his duties with a professional mask poorly worn. Every time he passed Nathan's seat, his comments were clipped, almost robotic but edged with veiled hostility. "You sure he's buckled?" Hollis asked once, pausing just long enough for his voice to carry. His eyes didn't look at Theo. They looked through Nathan, as if daring him to respond. Nathan didn't flinch. "He's fine," he said calmly. Later, when Hollis reached for the trash, he made another remark. "Can't have any more accidents with your little setup." A flick of his hand toward Theo, then away, like swatting at a fly. Nathan said nothing, not because he didn't have words, but because his mind was now completely in motion. He wasn't just thinking about justice. He was thinking about how to deliver it. He adjusted Theo gently, glancing around the cabin. Every row had its own witnesses. Some had stayed silent, heads down. Others had watched closely, discomfort clear in their expressions. Nathan began to mentally map them. The couple near the emergency exit who whispered after the incident, the teenage boy in row 6 who kept turning back, the older man by the window who shook his head slowly but said nothing. Each one held a piece of the story. He didn't need all of them to speak. He just needed enough. Theo stirred in his arms, a soft whimper breaking through his sleep. Nathan whispered soothing words into his son's ear, rocking gently. The baby's fingers clutched weakly at his shirt again as if seeking reassurance. Nathan felt the weight of that tiny grip, felt it like a vow. Kyle Mercer passed by next, delivering drinks. As he leaned over a nearby seat, his eyes flicked to Nathan and lingered. He didn't speak, but the expression was clear, still watching, still amused. Then he moved on. Nathan's jaw clenched. He wasn't afraid, not for himself, but he was beginning to understand something deeper. This wasn't a moment of rudeness or a single man's poor behavior. This was a pattern, a performance rehearsed in silence and cruelty. Hollis was the showman, but Kyle was the audience who bought a front row seat, and they believed fully that no one would stop them. Nathan took out his phone, not to call anyone yet, but to ensure it was ready. The camera had already been running earlier. He checked the video. It had captured part of the snack tray incident, enough to show Theo lifted, the plate resting on his back, and Hollis's grin. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. And beginnings were powerful. From the front of the cabin, Hollis glanced back. Their eyes locked for half a second. Nathan didn't blink. He was done being quiet. He glanced at Ryan again, who gave a subtle nod and shifted in his seat, ready for more. Nathan knew now, this man wasn't just a witness. He was watching the same fire grow, waiting for the right moment to step in. What Nathan didn't see was the figure in row 12, seated by the window. A passenger with glasses and a dark coat, whose expression had remained unreadable the entire flight. He had said nothing, drawn no attention. But now, his eyes were locked on Hollis and Kyle, watching them not with curiosity, but with intent. He reached into his backpack slowly, fingers brushing past a small black drive. Back in row 4, Nathan leaned his head against the seat, his eyes never leaving the aisle. He didn't realize yet that the most shocking retaliation would not come from him, but from someone entirely unexpected before the plane even landed. Sometimes the quietest passengers are the ones planning the loudest answers. "Guess our table's back in service," Hollis muttered with a cruel smirk, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the murmurs in the cabin. Nathan's heart stilled. He looked down and saw it, Hollis, bending slightly over with a butter knife in hand, its dull handle resting with mock ceremony on Theo's tiny back as if the infant were a piece of furniture. For a split second, everything inside Nathan froze, his breath, his thoughts, even the instinct to act. His hands tightened protectively around Theo, whose little body squirmed in discomfort, unsure of the violation but disturbed all the same. Laughter rose, sharper this time, edged with something uglier than before. It wasn't the surprised, awkward chuckles of passengers caught off guard by a joke. This was mean-spirited amusement, the kind people wore like armor when they didn't want to be the next target. Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears, louder than the engine hum, louder than the shallow, thoughtless laughter. He looked up into Hollis's face, smug, self-satisfied, and completely at ease with the cruelty of the moment. The baby's back. A knife. A joke. His thoughts raced. If he stood now, if he pushed Hollis, said something, shouted, he risked looking like the problem. He imagined the headlines already forming. Irrational passenger endangers flight crew over misunderstanding. They wouldn't see the humiliation. They wouldn't see the violation. Just a man losing control. But then, from across the aisle, a movement, a blur of crisp sleeves, a rustle of rising intent. Ryan Maddox stood with a force that commanded attention, his tray clattering lightly as he opened it with purpose. He reached across the space between them, his hand swift, steady, and sure as he took the butter knife from Hollis's grip without permission, without fear. The laughter choked off. The air snapped taut. Ryan didn't raise his voice, but it carried, calm, cold, deliberate. "You want to use someone as a table?" he asked, locking eyes with Hollis. "Try me." He laid the knife carefully on his own tray table, pressing it down with a slow hand, like a dealer revealing his hand in a high-stakes game. Gasps whispered through the cabin. A woman up front turned in her seat. The man beside Nathan straightened, lips parting in disbelief. Even Theo went silent, as if the child understood something profound had just shifted. Hollis's face changed. His smile cracked. The smugness dissolved into a stunned rigidity. A man caught in a spotlight he had aimed at someone else. His lips twitched, searching for a retort, but nothing came. His eyes darted briefly toward the galley, toward escape, then snapped back to Ryan. "You need to sit down, sir," he said finally, his voice lacking the authority it once carried. "I'm seated," Ryan replied evenly, resting his arms on the tray. "And you've made your point. Now the rest of us are making ours." The stillness that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. It was a verdict. Nathan stared at Ryan, not just in gratitude, but in quiet awe. There was no anger on the man's face, no self-righteousness, just a firm line of dignity, drawn in silence and steel. Nathan felt the pressure in his chest ease, a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying finally shifting off his spine. Hollis blinked, mumbled something under his breath, and turned on his heel, retreating down the aisle like a child caught doing something shameful. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. His usual swagger had vanished, replaced by something brittle. Nathan looked down at Theo, who had curled into his chest again, seeking the warmth of safety. A soft voice from behind murmured, "About time someone said something." Nathan didn't turn. He didn't need to. He could feel the tide changing. One man's stand had become a ripple, moving through the rows. The laughter was gone now. No one dared defend Hollis out loud. Shame had replaced it, along with the uneasy knowledge that silence was no longer an excuse. Nathan leaned slightly across the aisle and whispered, "Thank you." Ryan nodded once, then resumed his seat like nothing had happened. But Nathan knew what had just taken place was anything but ordinary. He sat straighter now. The moment burned into his mind, not just for its cruelty but for its defiance. He could still feel the cold metal of the butter knife where it had touched his son's back, but he also remembered the sound of courage slamming down onto a tray table. In that moment, Nathan realized something powerful. He wasn't alone. There were eyes watching, hearts stirring, truths being recorded, not just on phones, but in memories that would not forget. The seatbelt sign blinked above as the plane lurched gently in its descent, but Nathan's focus was set forward now, past the landing, past the terminal. He was no longer just a father and CEO on his way to a meeting. He was the start of something. Sometimes, an ally appears in the unlikeliest row. The landing jolted the cabin, a rough bounce that shook the overhead compartments and drew startled gasps from a few passengers. But the real turbulence was not in the air. It was in the silence that followed. Nathan Corbin gripped the armrest with one hand and held his son Theo close with the other, feeling the boy stir against his chest. The infant whimpered softly, his tiny hand curling instinctively into Nathan's shirt. Beside him, Ryan Maddox sat perfectly still, his jaw clenched, eyes scanning the front of the cabin like a sentry. Neither man spoke. Mark Hollis had not come near them since the incident with the knife. He moved through the aisle now like a performer after a failed act, his usual mocking confidence replaced by rigid efficiency. But the fake smile he gave to the other passengers, those who had laughed, those who had stayed silent, was brittle. Behind it, Nathan saw something darker. Hollis didn't look humiliated. He looked dangerous. Near the galley, Kyle Mercer leaned in close to Hollis, whispering something urgently. Hollis didn't respond with words, only a slow nod, his eyes flicking in Nathan's direction and then quickly away again. Nathan caught the exchange and tightened his grip on Theo. His instincts screamed that Hollis wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The plane taxied across the runway toward the terminal. The cabin was quiet now, the earlier buzz of chatter replaced by tense stillness. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off with a chime, and immediately passengers unbuckled and began rising. But Nathan didn't move. He wasn't about to be the first to leave the aircraft and expose himself to whatever games Hollis might still be planning. Instead, he waited. He looked up and saw them. A group of passengers, 3 men in business casual and 1 in a polo shirt with a camera bag, hesitated near row 4. They didn't rush for the overhead bins like the others. Instead, they turned slightly, casting glances at Nathan, then to each other. One of them, a man with salt and pepper hair and a deep crease in his forehead, leaned forward. "We saw what happened," he said in a low voice. If you need video, I got some. I think a few of us did." Nathan gave a small nod of acknowledgement, his throat tight. "Thank you," he said softly, grateful but wary. He didn't want to draw more attention than necessary. The man gave a short nod and stepped aside as more passengers exited the plane. From the corner of his eye, Nathan saw Hollis standing at the front galley, arms folded, pretending to supervise the deplaning process. But his eyes were locked on Nathan, and there was nothing neutral about that stare. It was cold, calculating. Ryan leaned toward him, voice low. "He's not embarrassed. He's pissed." "I know," Nathan replied. "You should walk out behind a group. Keep some buffer between you and him." "I'm not giving him my back," Nathan said. "Not yet." Passengers began to trickle past them, some giving Nathan subtle nods, others avoiding eye contact altogether. One young man paused long enough to whisper, "I've got video if you need it. I'm uploading to the cloud now." Then he slipped into the aisle and was gone. The outpouring of quiet support stirred something in Nathan. Gratitude, yes, but also a growing sense of urgency. These passengers had witnessed something they couldn't unsee. He wasn't just defending Theo anymore. He was protecting everyone who recognized how wrong this was and had chosen not to stay silent. Nathan shifted slightly, repositioning Theo against his shoulder as the boy stirred. His small body was still tense, and every time Hollis's voice came over the intercom, Theo flinched. Nathan kissed the top of his son's head and whispered, "Almost there, buddy. Just a little longer." The cabin slowly emptied, row by row, and with each departing passenger the space felt more exposed. Nathan could sense it coming, the moment Hollis would make his move, one final strike to regain control of the narrative before they exited the plane. But it never came. Instead, Hollis stood frozen, lips pursed in a forced smile as Nathan rose, still holding Theo, and stepped into the aisle. Ryan stood close behind him, a silent wall of support. As they approached the front galley, Nathan noticed Kyle Mercer watching them with a strange mix of fear and amusement, eyes darting between them and Hollis like he was expecting fireworks. "Have a good evening," Hollis said, voice stiff. Nathan didn't stop, didn't answer, but he made sure their eyes met, for just a second. And what he saw there wasn't guilt. It was calculation. That scared him more than anything else. In the jet bridge, the air felt cooler, but no less heavy. Nathan stepped aside to let a few passengers pass, standing near the side railing with Ryan. Behind them, a few men from the cabin began to gather, passengers who had witnessed everything and who weren't ready to walk away just yet. "I counted 5 phones recording," Ryan said, checking his watch, "and at least 3 of those guys are hanging back. We've got momentum." Nathan nodded, scanning the area. He felt the weight of Theo's head resting on his shoulder, his son's breath finally slowing. But the danger hadn't passed. If anything, it had just changed shape. The battle had moved from the aisle to the terminal, and from the terminal, it would stretch far beyond. He looked once more toward the gate door behind them, where Hollis had not yet emerged. A part of him hoped that was the end of it, but a larger part knew better. The battle isn't always fought in the air. It often begins when the wheels touch down. "Send me the photos now," Nathan said, his voice tight as he guided Ryan toward a quiet corner of the terminal, away from the rushing crowd and the sterile overhead announcements. The 2 men moved with urgency, cutting through the tide of disembarking passengers. Ryan's fingers moved quickly over his phone, selecting the clearest images, Hollis's smirk, the snack plate on Theo's back, and the second incident with the knife. He hit send. The files arrived on Nathan's phone with a soft chime. Nathan opened them immediately, his jaw locking tighter with each image. He zoomed in, studying Hollis's expression. It wasn't just unprofessional. It was cruel, intentional, mocking. The photos weren't just documentation. They were ammunition. "Here," Ryan said, handing over his own device. "I typed a brief statement of what I saw, just in case. It's not notarized or anything, but it's clear. Time-stamped, too." Nathan nodded, taking the phone and glancing at the note. The words were precise, methodical, exactly what he needed. "Thank you," he said, lowering his voice. "This isn't going to stop here." Behind them, the terminal's white lights cast a clinical glow on the polished floor, reflecting the disjointed shadows of people moving in every direction. Theo stirred in his chest carrier, letting out a faint whimper. Nathan instinctively shifted, shielding his son from the noise and commotion. They weren't alone for long. "I recorded it too," came a voice from behind. Nathan turned to see an older man, gray-haired, slightly hunched, wearing a tan jacket, stepping forward. His hand trembled slightly as he held out his phone. "I'm Julian Reeve," the man said. "Row 9. I saw what he did. I couldn't believe it. I filmed it." He paused, swallowing. "It's not perfect footage, but it's clear enough. I thought I should do something." Nathan took the phone gently and played the video. The image was a bit shaky, but unmistakable. Hollis lifting Theo like a tray, placing the plate on the infant's back, and then stepping back with that mocking grin. Nathan felt the heat rise in his chest again, not from rage this time, but from the crushing weight of what this meant. His child had been reduced to a prop in front of a plane full of strangers, and now the proof was undeniable. Ryan leaned over Nathan's shoulder, watching in silence. Then he looked around. "We need to act fast," he said. "Once Hollis realizes this is going public, he'll go to the supervisor and file his version of the story. Probably claim you were difficult, aggressive, unstable, anything to flip the narrative before the truth spreads." Nathan exhaled sharply. "Then we get there first." He turned back to Julian. "Would you be willing to share this video? Transfer it to my phone?" "Of course," Julian said quickly, nodding. "I already backed it up, just in case." They exchanged information, transferring the file while Ryan pulled out his own phone again and tapped through contacts. "I've dealt with corporate security before," he said. "My firm consults on internal ethics audits, fraud cases, even crisis response. I know how these people think. We need to bring in the airline's ground supervisor now, and we do it in the open. Public space, witnesses. If we go into some back office with no cameras, they'll try to make this disappear." Nathan agreed, nodding. "They'll downplay it, twist it." Ryan raised a hand, motioning toward a passing airline staff member. "Excuse me," he said, voice firm. "Can you page the ground supervisor for this flight? It's urgent." The staffer blinked at him, clearly uncertain. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Nathan answered without hesitation. "A serious one." The staffer gave a polite but cautious nod and walked off toward the desk. Meanwhile, a few more passengers gathered, faces Nathan recognized from the plane. A young man in a navy hoodie murmured that he had caught part of the second incident on video. Another, a middle-aged man with glasses, offered to write a statement. The crowd was growing, slowly, organically. People weren't just curious, they were ready to speak up, and Hollis wasn't far. Across the concourse, Nathan spotted him. The flight attendant stood with Kyle Mercer near a vending machine, speaking quickly, hands gesturing in tight circles. When Hollis glanced their way, his face darkened. His posture shifted, no longer smug, but defensive, calculating. "They're planning their story," Ryan muttered, following Nathan's gaze. Nathan nodded. "Then we're already too late to stop it quietly." Before Ryan could respond, a man in a black vest with a staff badge approached them. He was broad-shouldered and brisk, the kind of man whose job was more about controlling panic than resolving it. "Harold Dempsey," the man introduced, barely making eye contact. "I'm the ground supervisor. Someone reported an issue?" Nathan stepped forward, holding his phone. "There's been an incident involving your crew member, Mark Hollis. We have multiple witnesses and video evidence that he acted inappropriately toward my child. I want this documented immediately." Dempsey frowned, folding his arms. "I think it would be best if we discuss this in a private office." "No," Nathan said sharply, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'm not stepping into any room alone with your team while this is handled. Everything stays out here, in public, and on record." Dempsey's eyes flicked around at the small crowd forming, clearly uncomfortable. "Let's not escalate this further in front of others." But before he could insist again, a quiet figure stepped out from the background. A tall man in a black coat and plain jeans, who had been seated silently nearby for most of the conversation. He approached Nathan with quiet purpose. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask questions. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a small USB drive, and placed it in Nathan's hand. "Everything you need," he said in a low voice, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the passing crowd. Nathan stared after him, stunned. "Who was that?" Ryan's eyes were wide. "I don't know, but that—" He looked at the USB, then back at Nathan. "That might be internal footage." From the plane, Nathan gripped the drive tightly, his breath catching. The entire case had just taken a sharp turn. The ground supervisor stepped forward again. "Sir, if you're unwilling to cooperate—" "We are cooperating," Ryan cut in. "You're just not ready for what we're bringing." Nathan met Dempsey's gaze, calm but firm. "You're not just dealing with a complaint anymore. You're dealing with something much bigger than you think." He didn't say another word. He didn't need to, because deep down, he already knew. Sometimes the person you haven't noticed is the one who has noticed everything. He grabbed the infant and set a plate on him like a prop. Sure, no one would dare speak up. If you believe cruelty must face consequences, hit subscribe. Justice starts here. "Let's not escalate this further in public," Harold Dempsey muttered, his voice low and flat as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His arms were folded tightly across his chest, the fluorescent lights of the terminal casting a dull sheen over his balding head. The stocky ground supervisor looked like a man more concerned with keeping order than finding truth. His badge hung crookedly from his shirt pocket, and his eyes darted nervously between Nathan Corbin and the two flight attendants lingering nearby. Nathan stood his ground. Theo clutched protectively in his arms, the child's head resting against his father's chest. Ryan Maddox stood just behind him, his phone still displaying the time-stamped image of the knife resting on Theo's back. Julian Reeve, the older passenger with shaky hands but unwavering resolve, remained close as well, clutching his phone like a lifeline. The group formed a silent but immovable barrier between Dempsey and any attempt to sweep the incident under the rug. "I'd prefer we discuss this right here," Nathan said, his voice calm but razor-edged. "In front of witnesses." Dempsey hesitated, his lips parting slightly before pressing together again. He glanced over Nathan's shoulder, toward Hollis and Kyle, who were huddled several feet away near a pillar, speaking in hushed tones. Kyle kept nervously looking toward Nathan's group, while Hollis maintained an air of smug defiance, arms crossed and expression unreadable. Dempsey took a step closer to Nathan, lowering his voice. "Mr. Corbin, we don't want to cause unnecessary disruption in a public space. People are watching." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Yes, they are, which is exactly why I'm not stepping into a back room where evidence might mysteriously disappear or suddenly become a misunderstanding. I'm not here to play games. My child was humiliated and endangered. You're not sweeping this under the terminal floor." Before Dempsey could reply, the crowd around them seemed to part slightly. A man emerged from the fringe, a quiet, nondescript figure in a plain gray jacket and wire-rimmed glasses. He walked with a slow, steady gait, his face unreadable but focused. Leo Hartman didn't speak as he approached. He didn't make eye contact with Hollis or Dempsey. He didn't even glance at Ryan or Julian. He simply reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small black USB drive, and placed it directly into Nathan's hand. His fingers briefly touched Nathan's, his grip surprisingly firm. "Everything you need," Leo said softly, his tone matter-of-fact, not dramatic. Nathan blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, what is this?" But Leo didn't answer. He had already turned, slipping effortlessly back into the crowd as if he had never been there. In less than 5 seconds, he vanished from sight. Ryan leaned in immediately, whispering, "That guy was sitting a few rows behind us. I didn't notice him get involved at all. You think this is—" Nathan stared down at the drive in his hand, suddenly aware of how cold it felt. His mind spun through possibilities. Could it be the cabin footage? Access to the plane's internal feed was tightly controlled. Only someone with insider connections could have pulled it. Was Leo an employee? A whistleblower? Someone planted by a competitor? "Plug it in," Nathan said, slipping the USB into his jacket pocket and meeting Dempsey's gaze again. "What was that?" Dempsey asked, his voice tightening. "Insurance," Nathan replied. "And if you think I'm bluffing, go ask your flight attendant why he used my son as a piece of furniture. Or better yet, ask the internet. Videos are already online." The older supervisor's face paled slightly. He opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Around them, passengers were still moving, still boarding new flights or picking up luggage, but the tension in this particular corner of the terminal had grown thick enough to stop air. Ryan stepped forward, his tone calm but forceful. "I'd advise you, Harold, to document everything that happens from this moment forward. Because from where I'm standing, this is looking less like damage control and more like obstruction." Dempsey's lips tightened into a thin line, but he gave a single nod, perhaps of acknowledgement, perhaps of retreat. He turned away, muttering something into his radio, leaving Nathan and the others in a bubble of strained silence. Nathan exhaled, adjusting Theo in his arms. The boy stirred, letting out a soft sound as if sensing the emotional weight around him. Julian stepped closer and placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder. "I was scared to speak up," Julian said, his voice trembling. "But you didn't flinch. You stayed firm. That matters." Nathan nodded once, feeling the heat rise behind his eyes but keeping his expression composed. This wasn't about pride, it was about protecting his son and ensuring no one else endured this kind of cruelty. Ryan looked around, then back to Nathan. "We need to get somewhere quiet, somewhere we can plug this in." Nathan nodded. "Let's move." As the small group began walking toward the nearby cafe area, a corner with fewer people and enough outlets for a laptop, Nathan's mind was already racing ahead. If the footage on that USB was what he suspected, the entire story was about to change. It wouldn't be his word against a smug flight attendant anymore. It would be the truth, undeniable and permanent. Somewhere behind him, he could feel Hollis watching. Nathan didn't turn around. He didn't need to, because the moment the USB touched his palm, the stakes had changed forever. A single piece of evidence can turn a complaint into a reckoning. Nathan inserted the USB drive into Ryan's laptop with a click that echoed louder in his ears than it should have. The small cafe in the terminal buzzed with idle conversation, but for him, the world had narrowed to the screen in front of them. He leaned in, his heart pounding with anticipation and a flicker of dread. Ryan's fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, navigating into the hidden files. The moment the video loaded, Nathan's breath caught. There was no ambiguity. The footage played in crisp, time-stamped frames. First, Hollis walking down the aisle, the smirk already present on his face as he stopped beside Nathan's seat. Nathan and Theo came into view clearly, the baby cradled gently in his father's arms. Hollis reached down, casually lifting Theo as if he were an object, then balancing the snack plate on the infant's back. The act, though brief, was calculated. Not rushed, not improvised. It was theatrical. A slow, demeaning gesture captured in full clarity. Nathan's hands clenched the edge of the table as he watched himself frozen in disbelief on the screen. He remembered the heat rising in his chest, the weight of Theo's small body trembling as he was placed back. But seeing it from this angle, seeing the casual cruelty, the complete disregard, it stung deeper. His jaw tightened. Across from him, Ryan said nothing, but his narrowed eyes flicked to the screen with grim focus. "Pause it," Nathan said. Ryan did. The image froze on Hollis's mocking face, eyes half-lidded, mouth twisted into a grin that now felt even more sinister in hindsight. Nathan swallowed hard. "Play the next one." The footage jumped to the second incident. This time, Hollis carried a tray with a small butter knife. He stopped beside Nathan's seat again, made some unheard remark, and then leaned down, pretending to rest the knife handle on Theo's back. The moment was brief but deliberate, and just before he did it, Kyle Mercer came into frame, lingering behind Hollis with a smirk of his own. He nudged Hollis slightly, almost as if to encourage him. Their body language spoke volumes. This wasn't a rogue act. It was staged. Ryan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't just misconduct," he said quietly, his tone dark and steady. "It's a coordinated act." Nathan nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. They knew exactly what they were doing. For a moment, neither man spoke. The noise of the cafe around them faded into background static. The video had given them clarity, but it also brought a dangerous responsibility. This wasn't just a viral moment or a petty insult. It was something bigger, something that, if handled wrong, could spin into a public relations war they weren't ready for. Nathan's mind raced. They couldn't afford to be reactive. The airline, no doubt, was already working to shape the story, and if they released the footage too soon, the airline would have time to prepare a spin, discredit the context, and bury the truth beneath rehearsed apologies and technical denials. "First thing we do," Nathan said, his voice low but firm, "is duplicate the files. Multiple drives, multiple backups, no single point of failure." Ryan nodded and immediately connected an external drive. "Already ahead of you." Nathan pulled out his phone and began composing an encrypted message to Dominic, his lawyer. He attached one of the drives and slipped it into a padded envelope to be couriered within the hour. The rest he stashed in his shoulder bag, one in his coat pocket, and one he instructed Ryan to keep. Neither noticed the figure watching from across the cafe, a middle-aged man in a rumpled blazer with a crew badge partly obscured by a scarf. He watched Nathan and Ryan with careful, assessing eyes before walking off briskly in the opposite direction. Back at the table, Nathan rubbed his temple. "They'll call it an overreaction," he muttered. They'll say I was hostile, emotional, threatening. Ryan turned to him, his voice steady. Then we stay ahead of them, with evidence, with order. Let them speak first, then we hit back. Nathan didn't respond right away. His mind flashed back to the moment Hollis had reached for his son, how helpless he had felt, how dehumanizing the laughter had sounded. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about stopping a culture that allowed people like Hollis and Kyle to keep getting away with it. He closed the laptop slowly, sealing the evidence back into his case. As he stood, Ryan checked his phone. A new email alert popped up on his screen from an address neither of them recognized, but the subject line made their blood run cold. Incident 7C, Passenger Aggression Report, filed by M. Hollis. Nathan stared at the message, his pulse kicking up again. He's already filing his version. Ryan exhaled. He's trying to frame you before the story breaks. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Then we stay quiet just long enough for them to dig in. The deeper they go, the harder it'll be to climb out once the truth comes out. The sound of a boarding announcement echoed over the terminal speakers, but Nathan didn't move. The race had begun, not just for public perception, but for justice. Everything depended on timing now. Every move had to be calculated, strategic. They would not let Hollis spin this story into a lie. Ryan glanced at him. What now? We send the files, Nathan said, gripping the edge of his bag, and we wait for the airline to speak first. He turned toward the terminal exit, the final words playing in his mind like a warning and a promise. In a fight for the truth, timing can be more dangerous than the lies. The hotel door clicked shut behind Nathan as he stepped inside. Theo, fast asleep against his chest, his small frame still curled in from the trauma of the flight. Nathan didn't even set down his suitcase before his phone began to vibrate. Again, and again, and again. He lowered Theo gently onto the bed, nestling a pillow beside him for safety, then checked his screen. 10 missed calls, 4 voicemails, a dozen messages, all urgent. Headlines were already flashing across news feeds. Flight attendant humiliates tech CEO's infant in mid-air incident. Father outraged after baby used as tray table. Corporate leader speaks out after in-flight mockery of child. Nathan's jaw tensed as he scrolled through a barrage of links, each one snowballing the incident into something far beyond what he had anticipated. He barely had time to process the headlines when his phone rang again. This time, it was Dominic Vance, his attorney. Nathan answered with a clipped, "Yeah?" Dominic's voice came through with practiced calm, but Nathan could hear the underlying urgency. "It's everywhere, Nathan. The clips, the photos, some of them already have over 2 million views. You need to stay completely silent for now. No posts, no interviews. Let us handle this the right way." "I don't want to stay silent," Nathan replied, pacing the room, one hand running through his hair. "They mocked my child. They put a knife on his back like he was some tray. People need to know that wasn't just a joke. It was cruel. Calculated, I know," Dominic said firmly, "but if we move too fast, they'll spin this. You give them too much too soon, they'll claim it's doctored, out of context, emotional exaggeration. We go with a formal release once we've filed everything." There was a short pause before a second voice joined in. Ryan Maddox, patched in on the call. "Dom's right, but there's one thing we can do. One controlled shot, one still frame from the footage. No sound, just an image they can't twist." Nathan's eyes flicked to the laptop on the desk. The footage was already loaded, courtesy of the USB Leo had handed him. His finger hovered over the trackpad, the timeline of the video spread out like a minefield waiting to be stepped on. Ryan continued. "Use the frame where Hollis places the knife on Theo's back. The angle is clear. You can see his expression, his intent. It says everything without a single word." Nathan clicked slowly through the timeline, stopping on that exact moment. Hollis's face was twisted into a grin that carried no warmth. His hand hovered over Theo's tiny body, knife handle resting mockingly on the infant's spine as though this were part of some in-flight entertainment. He stared at the frame. The room seemed to shrink around him. He could feel his breath tightening in his chest, the helplessness returning, except now it came with purpose. Ryan's voice softened. "You're not just a father here. You're a CEO. You understand optics. This image will speak volumes. Let it. Then we hold the rest back until they commit to their defense." Nathan nodded to himself, though no one could see. "Post it." Within minutes, the image was shared from his official account, captioned simply, "This is my son." "This is what they did?" He stepped back from the desk and waited. The response was immediate. Notifications flooded in like a wave breaking against a seawall. Thousands of shares, then tens of thousands. Public figures began commenting. News channels requested interviews. Outrage poured in across social media platforms, each comment more furious than the last. But amid the storm, Nathan remained still, watching, listening, measuring. Across the room, Theo stirred softly in his sleep, oblivious to the firestorm now swirling around his name. Nathan walked over, brushed a hand over his son's back protectively, and whispered, "It won't happen again. I'll make sure of it." Just then, his phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Dominic. "Brace yourself. Their counterattack will come fast." Nathan didn't flinch. He simply looked out the hotel window at the city skyline beyond, the reflection of the photo he had posted still glowing on his laptop screen behind him. The truth can set you free, but first it will put you in the crosshairs. Nathan Corbin's eyes snapped open to the sound of his phone buzzing violently on the nightstand. The soft light of morning barely filtered through the hotel curtains, but the screen already glowed with dozens of missed calls, texts, and news alerts. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake Theo, who slept in a nearby bassinet, unaware of the storm circling his father. Nathan reached for the phone, his heart already bracing for what he might see. His inbox was flooded. Headlines screamed from every corner of the media. CEO claims baby used as tray table on flight. Father accuses airline staff of humiliation. Cruelty at 30,000 feet. News anchors debated the footage while talking heads speculated on whether the incident was a misunderstanding or a scandal in the making. Some praised Nathan's courage. Others quoted the airline's latest statement. A misinterpreted, light-hearted moment. He swiped through the notifications in silence, his jaw clenched. Every attempt to downplay the assault felt like a slap to his dignity, and to Theo's. Then came the headline that made him freeze. Crew union defends flight attendant, alleges CEO acted aggressively. He sat in stunned disbelief. Aggressive? He had barely spoken. He had held back every instinct to protect Theo, all in the name of strategy, and now they were trying to frame him as the threat. Nathan stood up and moved to the window, pushing the curtains aside. Crestwell City stretched beneath him, steel and glass, cold and unblinking. He could see his own reflection faintly in the glass, but all he could think about was Hollis's smirk, the plate, the knife. The union's statement was a move, calculated, strategic. They were going to fight dirty. He'd have to fight smarter. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Dominic Vance. Nathan answered immediately. "They've started the smear campaign," Dominic said without greeting. His voice was brisk, heavy with fatigue. "They're claiming you intimidated the crew. We need to move fast before this narrative sets in." Nathan exhaled slowly, his voice steady. "We have the footage and witnesses. They can't bury this." "They'll try," Dominic replied, "but we're ahead barely. I've started drafting the preliminary lawsuit. You need to stay out of the spotlight until we release the official statement." "Too late for that," Nathan murmured. "I'm already in the spotlight. I just need to make sure I don't get burned." At that moment, Ryan Maddox walked into the hotel room. He had stayed in the adjoining suite overnight, preparing his own strategy. His face was tense, a laptop tucked under his arm. "Julian's agreed," he said without preamble. "He'll do a video interview. He's nervous, but he's solid." Nathan nodded, then noticed Ryan's expression shift. There was something else. "And?" Nathan prompted. Ryan glanced at the phone in Nathan's hand. "You should take this," he said, "but prepare yourself." The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Nathan hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Corbin?" a calm, low voice said. "This is Leo Hartman. We briefly spoke, sort of, at the terminal. I gave you the USB Nathan's breath caught." "Yes, I remember." "I've been watching the coverage," Leo continued. "There's something you need to know. Hollis and Kyle, this isn't new. I used to work for the airline, systems technician. I still have access to archived internal logs, complaint records, passenger reports. Most were never released." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "Then we stay quiet just long enough for them to dig in. The deeper they go, the harder it'll be to climb out once the truth comes out." The sound of a boarding announcement echoed over the terminal speakers, but Nathan didn't move. The race had begun, Not just for public perception, but for justice. Everything depended on timing now. Every move had to be calculated, strategic. They would not let Hollis spin this story into a lie. Ryan glanced at him. "What now?" "We send the files," Nathan said, gripping the edge of his bag. "And we wait for the airline to speak first." He turned toward the terminal exit, the final words playing in his mind like a warning and a promise. In a fight for the truth, timing can be more dangerous than the lies. The hotel door clicked shut behind Nathan as he stepped inside, Theo fast asleep against his chest, his small frame still curled in from the trauma of the flight. Nathan didn't even set down his suitcase before his phone began to vibrate. Again, and again, and again. He lowered Theo gently onto the bed, nestling a pillow beside him for safety, then checked his screen. 10 missed calls, 4 voicemails, a dozen messages, all urgent. Headlines were already flashing across news feeds. Flight attendant humiliates tech CEO's infant in midair incident. Father outraged after baby used as tray table. Corporate leader speaks out after in-flight mockery of child. Nathan's jaw tensed as he scrolled through a barrage of links, each one snowballing the incident into something far beyond what he had anticipated. He barely had time to process the headlines when his phone rang again. This time, it was Dominic Vance, his attorney. Nathan answered with a clipped, "Yeah?" Dominic's voice came through with practiced calm, but Nathan could hear the underlying urgency. "It's everywhere, Nathan. The clips, the photos. Some of them already have over 2 million views. You need to stay completely silent for now. No posts, no interviews. Let us handle this the right way." "I don't want to stay silent," Nathan replied, pacing the room, one hand running through his hair. "They mocked my child. They put a knife on his back like he was some tray. People need to know that wasn't just a joke. It was cruel. Calculated." "I know," Dominic said firmly, "but if we move too fast, they'll spin this. You give them too much too soon, they'll claim it's doctored, out of context emotional exaggeration. We go with a formal release once we've filed everything." There was a short pause before a second voice joined in. Ryan Maddox patched in on the call. "Dom's right, but there's one thing we can do. One controlled shot, one still frame from the footage. No sound, just an image they can't twist." Nathan's eyes flicked to the laptop on the desk. The footage was already loaded, courtesy of the USB Leo had handed him. His finger hovered over the trackpad. The timeline of the video spread out like a minefield waiting to be stepped on. Ryan continued, "Use the frame where Hollis places the knife on Theo's back. The angle is clear. You can see his expression, his intent. It says everything without a single word." Nathan clicked slowly through the timeline, stopping on that exact moment. Hollis's face was twisted into a grin that carried no warmth. His hand hovered over Theo's tiny body, knife handle resting mockingly on the infant's spine as though this were part of some in-flight entertainment. He stared at the frame. The room seemed to shrink around him. He could feel his breath tightening in his chest, the helplessness returning, except now it came with purpose. Ryan's voice softened. "You're not just a father here. You're a CEO. You understand optics. This image will speak volumes. Let it. Then we hold the rest back until they commit to their defense." Nathan nodded to himself, though no one could see. "Post it." Within minutes, the image was shared from his official account, captioned simply, "This is my son. This is what they did." He stepped back from the desk and waited. The response was immediate. Notifications flooded in like a wave breaking against a seawall. Thousands of shares, then tens of thousands. Public figures began commenting. News channels requested interviews. Outrage poured in across social media platforms, each comment more furious than the last. But amid the storm, Nathan remained still, watching, listening, measuring. Across the room, Theo stirred softly in his sleep, oblivious to the firestorm now swirling around his name. Nathan walked over, brushed a hand over his son's back protectively, and whispered, "It won't happen again. I'll make sure of it." Just then, his phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Dominic. "Brace yourself. Their counterattack will come fast." Nathan didn't flinch. He simply looked out the hotel window at the city skyline beyond, the reflection of the photo he had posted still glowing on his laptop screen behind him. The truth can set you free, but first it will put you in the crosshairs. Nathan Corbin's eyes snapped open to the sound of his phone buzzing violently on the nightstand. The soft light of morning barely filtered through the hotel curtains, but the screen already glowed with dozens of missed calls, texts, and news alerts. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake Theo, who slept in a nearby bassinet, unaware of the storm circling his father. Nathan reached for the phone, his heart already bracing for what he might see. His inbox was flooded. Headlines screamed from every corner of the media. CEO claims baby used as tray table on flight. Father accuses airline staff of humiliation. Cruelty at 30,000 feet. News anchors debated the footage while talking heads speculated on whether the incident was a misunderstanding or a scandal in the making. Some praised Nathan's courage. Others quoted the airline's latest statement. A misinterpreted, light-hearted moment. He swiped through the notifications in silence, his jaw clenched. Every attempt to downplay the assault felt like a slap to his dignity, and to Theo's. Then came the headline that made him freeze. Crew union defends flight attendant, alleges CEO acted aggressively. He sat in stunned disbelief. Aggressive? He had barely spoken. He had held back every instinct to protect Theo, all in the name of strategy. And now they were trying to frame him as the threat. Nathan stood up and moved to the window, pushing the curtains aside. Crestwell City stretched beneath him, steel and glass, cold and unblinking. He could see his own reflection faintly in the glass, but all he could think about was Hollis's smirk, the plate, the knife. The union's statement was a move, calculated, strategic. They were going to fight dirty. He'd have to fight smarter. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Dominic Vance. Nathan answered immediately. "They've started the smear campaign," Dominic said without greeting. His voice was brisk, heavy with fatigue. "They're claiming you intimidated the crew. We need to move fast before this narrative sets in." Nathan exhaled slowly, his voice steady. "We have the footage, and witnesses. They can't bury this." "They'll try," Dominic replied, "but we're ahead, barely. I've started drafting the preliminary lawsuit. You need to stay out of the spotlight until we release the official statement." "Too late for that," Nathan murmured. "I'm already in the spotlight. I just need to make sure I don't get burned." At that moment, Ryan Maddox walked into the hotel room. He had stayed in the adjoining suite overnight, preparing his own strategy. His face was tense, a laptop tucked under his arm. "Julian's agreed," he said without preamble. "He'll do a video interview. He's nervous, but he's solid." Nathan nodded, then noticed Ryan's expression shift. There was something else. "And?" Nathan prompted. Ryan glanced at the phone in Nathan's hand. "You should take this," he said, "but prepare yourself." The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Nathan hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Corbin?" A calm, low voice said. "This is Leo Hartman. We briefly spoke, sort of, at the terminal. I gave you the USB Nathan's breath caught." "Yes, I remember." "I've been watching the coverage," Leo continued. "There's something you need to know. Hollis and Kyle. This isn't new. I used to work for the airline, systems technician. I still have access to archived internal logs, complaint records, passenger reports. Most were never released." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "How many complaints?" Leo's voice didn't waver. "Too many, and all of them buried. There's one from a disabled vet. Hollis mocked him for his tremors. Another from a senior passenger who was denied help boarding because he walked too slowly. Same crew, same pattern. They write it off as resolved and file it where no one looks." Nathan sat down heavily, the air in the room shifting. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because," Leo replied, "what happened to your son isn't an accident. It's part of a culture I kept quiet too long. You're the first one making real noise." Nathan closed his eyes briefly, the weight of that truth sinking in. "Can you get me those records?" "They're encrypted," Leo said, "but yes. I'll send what I can. Just be careful. The airline has eyes, and if they find out what I'm doing, they'll come after both of us." The call ended, but the silence that followed was anything but calm. Nathan turned to Ryan, who had been listening silently. "This just got bigger," Nathan said quietly. "This isn't about a plate or a knife anymore. This is a pattern." Ryan nodded slowly, already opening his laptop. "We need to hit them where it hurts." Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the city skyline. Inside the hotel room, the pieces of a larger truth were beginning to fall into place. The smear campaign had tried to paint Nathan as unstable, but the real instability, the real threat, was within the walls of the airline itself. Nathan picked up his phone again, scrolling past the headlines, The noise, the spin. He opened a blank message, addressed it to Dominic and Ryan. Subject: Next phase. Message: We're not just defending Theo anymore. We're going after the system that let this happen. Let's get to work. He hit send. Sometimes the key to victory is buried in someone else's forgotten war. Dominic's fingers hovered over the keyboard as the loading bar inched forward, the tension in the hotel room thick enough to cut. Ryan stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes locked on the screen as the files Leo had sent began to unpack. Nathan, pacing near the window, turned sharply at the first soft ding of the completed extraction. The screen was a grid of file names, dozens of them, each stamped with internal codes, flight numbers, and vague subject lines. Dominic clicked on the first one. A report opened, dated 9 months prior. It described a complaint from a passenger, a retired veteran in a wheelchair, who alleged that flight attendant Mark Hollis had mocked his mobility while refusing to assist him to the lavatory. The report noted that the veteran had written in all caps, "He said, I should be glad we didn't put you in cargo." But the conclusion section only read, "Matter closed after goodwill voucher offered. No follow-up required." Nathan stepped forward, fists clenched. "No apology?" he asked, voice tight. Dominic shook his head grimly. More files followed. One described a frail elderly man who had been denied water for nearly 2 hours on a flight after accidentally pressing the call button twice. The accompanying note, presumably written by Kyle Mercer, read, "Passenger overly needy. Crew maintained professionalism." The file closed with a checkbox. "Complaint resolved. Passenger appeased." "This isn't misconduct," Ryan said, leaning closer. "This is a system that buries wrongdoing under bureaucracy." Nathan sat down slowly, Theo's earlier cries still echoing in his memory. He could still feel the weight of his son's trembling body, used like furniture. And now he knew. This wasn't Hollis's first offense. It was a pattern, a culture. "They didn't just fail to act," Nathan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "They taught them it was okay." The realization changed everything. Dominic, always calm and methodical, began to shift gears. "Then we're not just filing for personal injury and emotional trauma," he said. "We're initiating something bigger. A civil suit, yes, but also a petition for a federal investigation. This isn't about one passenger anymore." Ryan nodded, eyes sharp. "And we hit them where it hurts. Public trust. But we need to control the timeline. If we go public too soon, they'll bury this, shift blame, or worse, paint you as the aggressor. We wait until they lock in their defense. Then we release this." The plan formed quickly, each man contributing like gears falling into place. Dominic would begin immediate preparations for a dual legal strategy, civil litigation, and federal complaint. Ryan would begin quiet outreach to allies in media circles, ensuring that when the time came, the story would break wide. Nathan's role was the most crucial, patience, and that was the hardest part. His every instinct screamed for action, to shout the truth from the rooftops, to protect his son not just from further harm, but from the memory of having been dehumanized so publicly. But now Nathan saw it clearer than ever. This wasn't about one insult. It was about every passenger who had ever sat in silence, too humiliated or disempowered to fight back. Dominic leaned back in his chair and exhaled, rubbing his eyes. "There's one more thing we need to consider. If these records are in Leo's hands, they were never meant to see daylight. That means we're being watched. The airline won't just play defense now, they'll go on the attack. Retaliation's coming, and we need to be ready for it." Ryan walked to the mini-fridge and pulled out 3 bottles of water, handing them out like they were weapons. "Then we do what they don't expect. We stay calm, we get every duck in a row, and when they move, we'll already be 10 steps ahead." Nathan accepted the bottle without a word. He stared at it for a long second, then at the rows of documents still unopened on Dominic's screen. Each one a story, a failure, a person who had been told, either through silence or script, that their dignity didn't matter. Not anymore. "Start building the timeline," Nathan said, his voice steady now. "Every detail, every name. We don't just expose this, we make sure it never happens again." As Dominic resumed typing and Ryan set up cloud backups of every file, the room seemed to shift from reactive to ready. The pressure was enormous, but so was the purpose. Nathan looked out the window one last time, the city lights blinking far below like warning beacons. He wasn't just fighting for Theo anymore. He was fighting for every name buried in those files, And he was done being quiet. When the walls hide the truth, sometimes you have to tear down the building. The press conference began without warning. Nathan stood in his hotel room, the television screen flickering with the crisp image of an airline executive at a polished podium, the company logo looming behind him like a shield. The man, David Lawrence, head of media relations for Northfront Air, wore a placid smile, his tone practiced and smooth. In response to recent social media speculation, he said, flight attendants Mark Hollis and Kyle Mercer have been temporarily reassigned pending an internal review. We take these matters seriously and believe in transparency and care. However, based on preliminary assessments, we find no evidence of malice or intent in the incident involving passenger Nathan Corbin and his child. Nathan's hand slowly curled into a fist at his side. There it was, the soft deflection dressed in corporate civility. The word incident floated in the air like a smokescreen, erasing the sharp edges of what really happened. His son had been used as a prop. A butter knife had been rested on an infant's back. And now the airline was calling it a misinterpreted joke. No evidence of malice, Nathan muttered under his breath, voice taut with disbelief. Across the room, Ryan Maddox stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call and turned. "They're moving fast," he said, "trying to control the story before it controls them." Nathan nodded once, eyes still on the screen. "Then we move faster." Dominic Vance arrived 10 minutes later, a laptop under one arm and a folder of legal documents under the other. He didn't sit. "We have one shot to flip the public tide before they bury this underspin. We release footage, not all of it, just enough." Nathan looked up. "The knife?" Dominic nodded. "One still." One silent clip. Let the image speak for itself. They chose the moment carefully, frame by frame, pausing at the second Hollis's arm reached out and placed the knife handle squarely on Theo's tiny back. The flight attendant's expression in the still was undeniable. Smug, deliberate, mocking. Dominic drafted the statement with precision. "We respect due process. We support accountability. But we cannot allow our children to become the punchline of jokes at 30,000 feet. The safety and dignity of passengers is not a game. The image speaks for itself." Nathan Corbin. Nathan posted it at 3:11 p.m. By 3:18 p.m., it had over 10,000 shares. By 3:31 p.m., news outlets were already calling for quotes. Hashtags surged, number not a joke, number protect Theo, number fire Hollis. Within the hour, people from across the country, parents, passengers, crew members, began sharing their own stories. Some spoke of sarcasm and mistreatment, others of being ignored or mocked by crew members who acted above reproach. But a few stories were eerily specific. A passenger who claimed that Hollis once insulted her special needs brother, another who remembered Kyle laughing when an elderly man dropped his food tray. The puzzle pieces began to surface, scattered across the digital landscape. Nathan scrolled through them in silence, the weight of it all pressing against his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. Theo had become a symbol, and symbols were impossible to silence. Across the room, Ryan leaned against the wall watching the live response unfold. "We just turned their statement into kindling." Dominic's phone buzzed with incoming messages. Boardrooms are panicking. They're not just seeing a dad with a complaint, they're seeing a lawsuit with teeth. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, casting the hotel in long, golden beams. Inside, the room buzzed with urgency, but Nathan's attention remained razor-sharp. His thoughts drifted briefly to Theo, who was asleep in the next room under the care of a family assistant who had flown in that morning. He knew his son wouldn't remember the humiliation, but the world would. He paced slowly across the carpet, heart still hammering beneath his shirt. "They're going to come at us," he said, voice low. "They won't admit fault. They'll try to discredit me, find anything they can." "They already are," Ryan replied grimly, glancing at his phone. "A fake tweet's making the rounds. Claims you were rude to a gate agent 3 years ago. No details, no source." Dominic scoffed. "Classic diversion. They'll dredge up anything. It won't hold if we stay clean and hit first." But Nathan wasn't thinking of tweets or articles. He was thinking about intent. The way Hollis had grinned, the way Kyle had laughed, the way the airline even now was trying to paint it all as harmless. He turned to Dominic. "You said we still have the longer version of the footage?" "Yes. Hold on to it, But prepare the next release. If they try to flip the script again, we won't just show images, we'll show patterns." Dominic nodded, understanding the shift. "You're not just playing defense." "No," Nathan said, eyes narrowing. "We're burning the playbook." A knock at the door interrupted them. Ryan opened it to reveal a hotel staff member with a manila envelope marked Confidential, Legal Delivery. Dominic took it, slicing the seal quickly. Inside was a letter from Northfront's legal team, a cease and desist warning Nathan not to release any more footage, citing violation of company image rights and unauthorized access to internal recordings. Nathan stared at it. "They're scared." "They should be," Dominic muttered. Nathan stepped closer to the window, looking out at the horizon. The city lights were beginning to shimmer, and the hum of traffic drifted up faintly from below. But all he could think of was the sound of forced laughter on that plane, the silence of the passengers, the smirk on a man who thought cruelty was comedy. He breathed deeply, steadying himself. The battle wasn't just legal anymore, it was moral. He turned back to face his team. "Let's prepare a timeline. Every complaint ever filed about Hollis and Kyle, every redacted file Leo finds. I want it all documented and ready." Ryan tilted his head. "You think someone inside the company will break?" "They already have," Nathan said quietly. "And when the pressure builds, they'll make a mistake." Unbeknownst to him, miles away in a dimly lit corporate suite, a frantic call had just ended. A panicked executive, eyes wild with fear, had just authorized an action not listed in any protocol, a reckless attempt to discredit Nathan before the morning news cycle, one that would drag the company even deeper into the fire. When power is cornered, it often lashes out instead of letting go. Nathan's fingers paused mid-button on his dress shirt when Ryan's voice cut through the quiet hotel room like a warning shot. "Nathan," Ryan said, eyes glued to his phone, "you need to see this. Now." He crossed the room and handed over his device, face tense. Nathan took it with a sense of dread already forming in his stomach. The message was from Leo, short, urgent, and clear. "Check your inbox, now." No greeting, no explanation. Just a subject line attached to an audio file labeled Ops Conf Call, Urgent. Nathan clicked play. What followed was not just a revelation, it was confirmation of his worst fears. The voices in the recording were unmistakably high-ranking airline executives. Their tone was clipped, strategic, and venomous. What should have been a damage control session spiraled quickly into something far more sinister. "We need to get ahead of this Corbin narrative before it gains more traction," one male voice said, a cold, matter-of-fact delivery. "Discredit him. Quietly. Talk to PR about finding something, anything. Business ethics, maybe. Stir the pot about his investors or family life. We can't look like the villain here." Nathan didn't move. His body stiffened, the device now a weight in his hands. The room suddenly felt too small, too still. The echo of the executive's words continued to play in the background as if mocking him. "Are you okay?" Ryan asked, his voice low, cautious. Nathan nodded once, his jaw locked tight. "I'm not surprised, but now we have them. This changes everything." Ryan's gaze flicked toward the laptop bag. Dominic needs this, immediately. Nathan already had the thought. Within minutes, the audio was forwarded to Dominic Vance with a subject line that simply read, "Retaliation confirmed." Dominic, sharp as ever, didn't wait for a call. He texted back within seconds. "Preserving it. Filing for emergency injunction now. Do not go public until we lock this down legally." Nathan's hands were steady as he changed his shirt and adjusted his tie in the mirror, but his reflection betrayed the storm underneath. His eyes, always alert, now carried something else. Resolve, sharpened by betrayal. This wasn't just about Theo anymore. It wasn't even just about the flight. This was about how power operated behind closed doors, how cruelty wasn't always loud, it was planned. As the makeup artist arrived to prep him for the live interview, Nathan sat in silence, letting her brush away the fatigue that no makeup could truly hide. In the background, Ryan coordinated with Dominic, verifying that the injunction had been filed and the recording's metadata preserved. The legal net was tightening, and soon there would be no escape for those who thought themselves untouchable. Minutes before the interview, Nathan sat with his hands folded, staring into the soft glow of the studio lights. Ryan sat beside him, murmuring final talking points. The atmosphere in the room was calm, but charged, like the silence before a storm hits. The producer's voice crackled over the intercom. "Mr. Corbin, you're live in 60 seconds." Nathan looked up, his voice firm and steady. "Tonight, they hear everything." The broadcast opened with the usual anchor chatter, setting the stage for what viewers expected to be a routine follow-up on the now viral airline incident. But what unfolded over the next 15 minutes was something else entirely. Nathan didn't speak as a victim. He spoke as a man who had endured a public assault on his child's dignity, gathered irrefutable evidence, and now stood with receipts of corporate retaliation. He recounted the incident with calm precision, never theatrical, never exaggerated, just facts, cold and hard. Then he pivoted. "We've obtained a recording," Nathan said. The camera zoomed slightly to capture the weight in his voice, in which senior executives discuss strategies to fabricate stories about my personal life and company to silence me. They call it neutralizing. I call it exactly what it is: retaliation. The clip was not played, but the mention alone was enough. Viewers across the country sat up. Headlines updated in real time. Social media lit up like a dry forest touched by fire. Phrases like corporate smear campaign, executive conspiracy, and retaliation scandal trended within minutes. And then came the shift no one predicted. Board members who had privately expressed concern about the fallout began publicly applauding Nathan's integrity. Investors once fearful of bad press now saw leadership in crisis. Not the kind made in comfort, but the kind forged under pressure. As the interview ended, Nathan thanked the anchor with a firm handshake and walked off the set into the backstage hallway where Ryan stood waiting. The look on his face said it all. "You just turned the tide," Ryan said quietly. Nathan exhaled slowly, running a hand across his jaw. "They turned it for me the moment they planned to destroy my name." A moment passed, heavy with everything they had endured and everything that still lay ahead. The messages from Dominic came in like clockwork. "Emergency injunction granted. Recording is now court-protected evidence." Then another. "We proceed." And we proceed hard. Nathan stood in the quiet corridor, the hum of studio lights fading behind him. He could feel the weight of the moment settle across his shoulders, not as a burden, but as armor. This battle had started in the cabin of a plane with a single act of cruelty, but it was here, under the glare of cameras and within the pressure of truth, that the war would be won. Sometimes, the smallest act of cruelty becomes the spark that burns an empire to the ground. 7 minutes later, the tables turned. He became the table for the CEO's knife. If you stand for protecting the innocent and holding the cruel to account, subscribe now. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of racism, humiliation, and the abuse of vulnerable individuals for entertainment. Its purpose is to raise awareness about the harm caused by dehumanizing behavior, the need for accountability, and the importance of dignity and respect for all, while provoking thought about the lasting impact of cruelty.